Okay, so are you ready to dive into a story that feels like it's straight out of a spy movie?
Always up for a good international intrigue mystery. Hit me.
Today's deep dive is juicy. We're talking secret meetings, international sanctions, Venezuelan gold, the works.
Okay, you've piqued my interest. What's the source material for today's deep dive?
So it all comes from a recent investigative report. It was from a Spanish journalist who claims to have uncovered this whole web of intrigue.
It sounds intriguing already, but journalists is their claims. What makes this one stand out?
Right, I hear you. But get this journalist didn't just rely on rumors. They actually got their hands on some documents, real deal stuff, and even spoke to people directly involved in this whole thing.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking firsthand accounts and actual evidence. That's a game changer.
Exactly. That's the kind of stuff that makes for a truly compelling deep dive. It's not just speculation. We're dealing with some serious revelations here.
I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
All right, so first, let me introduce the key players in this whole saga. On one side, we've got Delcy Rodríguez, the vice president of Venezuela.
High stakes already.
Oh, absolutely. And then on the other side of the chessboard, we have Pedro Sanchez, the prime minister of Spain himself.
Okay, this is shaping up to be interesting. The Venezuelan VP and the Spanish PM. What's the connection?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. It all starts back in 2020. Delcy Rodríguez, who was officially banned from even entering the EU at the time.
Banned? What for?
Sanctions, a whole bunch of political stuff, but that's a deep dive for another day. The point is, she was banned from even setting foot in the EU, yet she still manages to make this, shall we say, discreet trip to Madrid.
Hold on. Banned from the EU, yet she ends up in Madrid. That's a bold move. There must be more to the story.
Exactly. See, our intrepid journalist wasn't content with just the official line. They did some digging, like real detective work, even visited the airport and the apartment building where Rodríguez supposedly stayed.
Going the extra mile, I see.
Always. And through their investigation, they uncovered that there were suitcases being unloaded, like a whole bunch of them, and they were whisked through without any customs checks or anything.
That's suspicious. Suitcases avoiding customs, a banned official, making a secret trip. What were they trying to hide? Drugs?
Weapons.
Even better. And by better, I mean way more complicated. Turns out those suitcases weren't carrying just any ordinary cargo. We're talking about 104 bars of Venezuelan gold.
Hold up, 104 bars of gold. This just went from 0 to 60 real quick. We're not talking about a small-time operation here. This is Venezuelan national reserves, their wealth, being moved around like a suitcase full of, well.
Right. It's a huge deal. And the fact that it was being moved in such a clandestine way, bypassing all the usual protocols, that just sets off all sorts of alarm bells. I mean, all the secrecy unless something shady was going on.
You're telling me. Okay, so we've got this clandestine meeting, a high-ranking official breaking international sanctions, and a massive amount of gold spirited away in the dead of night. This sounds more like a movie plot than reality. Oh, it gets even more cinematic, trust me. So the journalists, they followed the trail. And it doesn't just end in Madrid. It goes all the way to Russia, then takes a little detour through Zambia before finally landing back in Spain.
Russia, Zambia, and then back to Spain. Why such a roundabout route? It's like they were trying to make the gold's journey as convoluted and untraceable as possible.
Exactly. It's like a real-life financial shell game, but instead of cups in a ball, we're talking about literally tons of gold being shuffled around the globe.
This whole thing just screams attempt to cover something up. I mean, why else go through such elaborate measures?
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we've got Venezuelan gold flown from Russia, makes a stop in Zambia, before finally landing in Spain. It's all very hush-hush, very cloak and dagger. But wait, there's more.
There's always more to uncover, isn't there?
You know it. This is where our journalist really digs deep. And let me tell you, the rabbit hole goes even deeper than we thought. According to their sources, and this is where it gets really interesting, the gold didn't actually stay in Spain for long.
Oh, where did it end up?
It was flown to Turkey.
Turkey. Interesting. And what happened to the gold in Turkey?
Okay, get this. And this is straight from the journalist's source, who, by the way, wishes to remain anonymous. The gold was melted down.
Melted down. That's significant. Why go through the trouble of transporting it all that way only to melt it down? There has to be a reason.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so intriguing. See, gold bars, they usually have markings, identifiers that can be traced back to their source. By melting the gold down, those identifiers, they vanish.
I see. It's like wiping a hard drive clean. erasing any trace of its origins.
Exactly. It's like making that gold untraceable, a ghost in the world of finance.
It's a classic money laundering tactic. By turning the gold into something generic, something without a history, it can then be integrated back into the legitimate financial system. Squeaky clean, at least on the surface.
So we're not just talking about some missing gold here. We're talking about potential money laundering on an international scale. And if this journalist's source is telling the truth, those 104 bars of Venezuelan gold have essentially disappeared into thin air.
It's quite the disappearing act. But even with the gold essentially gone, the people involved leave a trail. Which brings us back to our mysterious Spanish businessman, Victor de Aldama.
Oh yeah, him. I was wondering when he'd pop back up. Okay, so remember how I mentioned his connections to Venezuelan football?
I do. Quite a curious detail.
Well, it turns out those connections run deeper than just casual interest. The journalist suggests that de Aldama was using those connections to act as a go-between.
A go-between for whom?
For high-ranking Venezuelan officials and, not wait for it, members of the Spanish government.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. If these allegations are true, we're not just talking about a rogue operation here. This could implicate individuals at the highest levels of government.
And it gets even crazier. Shortly after the gold was allegedly moved to Turkey, Victor de Aldama is arrested.
Oh. Arrested for what?
The exact charges are a bit murky, but the timing is definitely suspicious, don't you think?
Suspicious indeed. It does make you wonder if his arrest was directly related to the gold transfer.
Right. Like, was he about to blow the whistle on the whole operation, or did he double-cross the wrong people? It's like something straight out of a movie.
Hold on. It gets even more cinematic. Tell me they didn't.
Oh, but they did. Just before his arrest, there was a shooting. Someone targeted his car.
You're kidding. Was he hurt?
He was fine, thankfully. But still, a shooting. It adds a whole other layer of intrigue to this whole thing. And it makes you wonder, what exactly did de Aldama get himself caught up in?
This is incredible. We've got clandestine meetings, missing gold, alleged government cover-ups, and now he's shooting. It's like every episode of Homeland rolled into one.
And we're not even done yet. Remember, all this cloak and dagger intrigue, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. While this gold was being flown around the world, the people of Venezuela were, and still are, facing a devastating crisis.
That's right. Let's not forget about the human cost of this whole affair.
We're talking about a country in the grip of hyperinflation, food shortages, a full-blown humanitarian crisis, and meanwhile, you've got all this gold, their gold, being whisked around the globe.
This is a truly heartbreaking situation.
This journalist really drives that point home. They argue that this missing gold, it represents resources, vital resources, that were essentially stolen, not from some abstract entity, but from the Venezuelan people.
It's a powerful reminder that corruption often hits the most vulnerable the hardest. While those in power might be enriching themselves, it's the everyday people who pay the price.
And it makes you wonder about the role of other countries in all of this. I mean, Spain, for example, they were well aware of the sanctions against Venezuela, yet they allowed Delcy Rodríguez into the country.
Right, and let's not forget about those alleged connections between Victor de Aldama and members of the Spanish government.
Exactly. It's like, were there backroom deals being made? Were promises whispered in the shadows? The journalist even goes so far as to ask if this whole gold saga could be connected to Spain's reluctance to formally recognize Juan Guaidó as the legitimate leader of Venezuela.
It's certainly a question worth considering. International relations can be a murky business, full of unspoken agreements and compromises made behind closed doors.
It really makes you think about all the other stories like this that might be out there, hidden from view.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of investigative journalism, of people willing to dig deep and hold the powerful accountable.
Well said. This deep dive has been a wild ride and, honestly, a bit unsettling.
It's a reminder that the world is a complex place, and things aren't always what they seem.
It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, but it's important to remember that behind every headline, there are real people, real lives being impacted. So, the next time you hear about some international incident, some financial scandal, take a moment to think about the human cost, the ripple effects that might not be immediately apparent. That's something to ponder, isn't it?